Hi everyone, it's Jamie Batch, your instructor for A&P2. We are diving into one of my most favorite topics, and it seems kind of strange, but it's the urinary system. You will find that at the end of this system, this is our last, other than reproduction, our last body system, you are going to have this humongous puzzle of systems and parts and processes, and it's all going to start to fit together. The urinary system is one that includes input from lots of other body systems. So by the end of this chapter, you're going to have pretty much a full view of how the human body works. It's really awesome and super cool. So let's dive right in and get started. And we are starting with just a quick overview of the whole system as itself. So the urinary system itself consists of the two kidneys. These kidneys are receiving a quarter of the cardiac output. So at any given time, 25% of the blood in your entire body is in these two little organs, which is kind of crazy if you think about it because they're so small. But the blood has such an intimate relationship with our kidneys because there's so much filtering and processing that goes on here. So, and you'll see that as we move through this chapter. The urinary system performs an excretory function, right? Getting rid of the liquid wastes, the soluble waste products that are floating around in our body, and obviously producing urine for elimination. The urinary tract is separate from the kidneys. So the urinary tract includes the ureters, which are the little pee tubes, so to speak, that leave the kidneys. So all of the filtrate that's created in the kidneys from our blood goes down these ureters. They kind of travel through peristalsis, just like everything else in the body. They're lined with smooth muscle, and goes to the urinary bladder. The urinary bladder will store the urine as well as contract for elimination. And then the urethra is the actual tube leaving the bladder, going out into the external environment. It's longer in males than it is in females, and we'll take a look at all of these little pieces of the puzzle right here on this diagram. So you see the relative position of all of these things. The kidneys are retroperitoneal, so they're behind all of our peritoneal organs in the abdominal cavity. They're kind of stuck to the back wall of our body. And sorry, I heard something that sounded like an ice cream truck, and there is no ice cream truck this time of year. Anyways, that was strange. Sorry. The adrenal glands are like the little hats that sit on the top of the kidneys. They do have an input role on our kidneys, but it's very small. The adrenal glands obviously have a more important function in our endocrine system. And you can see there's long ureters coming from the kidneys as well as the bladder, urinary bladder, and urethra. So overall functions of our urinary system: adjusting blood volume and blood pressure. Guess you wouldn't have thought of that, huh? No, but because our kidneys have this 25% of the cardiac output, such a large percentage of the cardiac output, our kidneys have the ability to reduce blood volume. And when we reduce blood volume, we reduce blood pressure, right? So our urinary system is also going to be helpful in adjusting the plasma concentrations of our major ions like sodium and potassium, chloride, and other ions like magnesium and zinc and calcium. It's also important in stabilizing our blood pH. Just as much as our body's getting rid of sodium and potassium, our body can also get rid of hydrogen ions or reabsorb hydrogen ions, right? And hydrogen ion concentration is how we measure pH. Our urinary system is also important in conserving valuable nutrients, pulling those nutrients back in from the filtrate and keeping them in the body instead of eliminating them in the urine, and getting drugs and harmful toxins out of our bloodstream as well, and getting them out of the body. So you can pause the video here, go back and review this introductory section on the urinary system. We're going to keep moving forward and talking about kidney structure. So kidneys are literally like large kidney beans. They are reddish brown in color, just like kidney beans are. They look exactly like a kidney bean. And they're roughly 4 inches long or so. They have a hilum, much like some of our other organs have this hilum, this kind of point of entry into and out of the organ. This is where all the vessels, the ureters, etc., kind of go into this area. nerves as well. As I mentioned, the kidneys are retroperitoneal on the back wall of our abdominal cavity, and they're connected to the urinary bladder by those two little ureters and empty into the posterior surface of our bladder. And you can't see it from this picture, but we'll see some better pictures of the urinary bladder. We can see exactly where those ureters enter. Notice that one kidney is higher than the other. You might think to yourself, what is on that right side that takes up a lot of room? The liver, right? And that's why our right kidney is a little lower in position, because we have that big liver sitting there, taking up lots and lots of space on that upper right quadrant. So they're protected by our visceral organs on the anterior side, but on the posterior side, there's not a lot protecting them. There's some ribs there, but obviously our ribs are not a complete skeletal structure. There's space in between them, the intercostal space. So they're really surrounded by a fatty capsule. They are their number one protection is this fat that they are nestled in, and that is going to help protect them and isolate them. They're held in place by part of the peritoneum and the visceral organs that surround them, as well as connective tissues that are connecting the kidneys to the body wall and other organs. So as I was mentioning, this kidneys, the main protective part of our kidneys, or the main thing that's protecting our kidneys, I should say, is this connective tissue fatty capsule, right? So there's a fibrous capsule that surrounds the kidney. This is on the outer surface of the kidney. You can think of kidney structure. It's very similar to the spleen, where we had this capsule, a hilum, point of entry, and then there were all of these capillary networks inside of the spleen. It's the same type of setup here. We have this outer capsule, lots of connective tissue, collagen fibers holding everything together, and those collagen fibers are basically projecting through that fatty layer into the fascia to hold everything in place, right? The perinephric fat is the fatty capsule that surrounds our kidneys. Let's dissect that word briefly. Peri typically means surrounding. Neph, N-E-P-H, that's a prefix that's generally associated with kidneys. Nephrology is the study of kidneys function. And then fat. So this is perinephric fat. This is the fat that surrounds our kidneys. We also have renal fascia that's there. This is anchoring the kidney to all of the surrounding structures. And this is a much more dense outer layer that the whole kidney structure is found in. So here you can see a nice transverse section, the relative location of our kidney on that back wall of the abdominal cavity, and surrounded by all that perinephratic fat. There's that outer fibrous capsule, which is right on the surface of the kidney, kind of like how that epicardium was right on the surface of the heart. You see that again here with the fibrous capsule. And then the renal fascia is a nice outer layer anchoring that kidney in place with the surrounding muscle tissue. You can pause the video here, go back and review this section. Let's talk about some of the other important landmarks on our kidney. So we mentioned this fibrous capsule. That fibrous capsule invaginates and goes into the kidney at the hilum, and it lines what we call the renal sinus. The renal sinus is basically like a small cavity on the inside of our kidney. So again, the indentation on the kidney bean or on your kidney, right? That's the hilum. In that space there is our renal sinus. It's this empty space where all of these vessels are passing. And within that space, there's a lining of this fibrous capsule. It kind of comes in, it follows the lining of the kidney into this space so that it's nice and protected and insulated. The renal cortex is the superficial region of the kidney. So you have the capsule on the outside, then a cortex, then you have a medulla. So again, you have the same setup as maybe like a lymph node, right? Where we had a capsule, a cortex, and an inner medulla. Same idea, very, very different structure. So this inner medulla region has in it what's called renal pyramids. These are little upside down pyramid structures that are lining the inside of the kidney. If you were to cut a kidney in half, cut it in half, like a frontal section or a coronal section of the kidney. So then you could open it up like a book. You would see these little upside down pyramid structures. They're all pointing towards that renal sinus. Those are the renal pyramids. The renal pyramids are a special structure. We'll look at exactly what they are. A special structure in this medulla area of the kidney. They make up something called the renal papilla. Do you remember the word papilla kind of means, I don't know, breast? Kind of like breast tissue is pretty much what papilla means. So if you look at the inside of these pyramids, they kind of make these little humps, right? All of those little pyramids are pointing towards the center of our kidney, and they make up little humps or papilla, right? And then the renal columns will separate the pyramids from each other. They're little kind of strips of cortex material going in between our pyramids. A kidney lobe is one section of our kidney. So this is the pyramid and the outer cortex and the capsule that surrounds. This is called a lobe. So you'd have all of these lobes lining the kidney, 6 to 18 or so, again, depending on size. There's a much better picture, right? You're probably trying to visualize exactly what I'm talking about. Hopefully you have your book in front of you. But if you don't, hopefully I didn't totally baffle you with my terrible, hopefully it wasn't too terrible, explanation there. There are our pyramids pointing in. The papilla are all of these pointy tips, right, pointing towards the middle. The renal columns going in between our renal pyramids, and the entire section, which would be our pyramid with the outer cortex and capsule, making up a kidney lobe or lobule, right? The sinus region is this empty cavity in the middle where we have all of these collecting vessels, and the hilum is the point of entry. Notice this part is called the renal sinus, but it's also called the renal pelvis. There's different names, and there's kind of a technical difference between the two of them, but it's all the same general area. The renal pelvis is referring more towards the collecting system, whereas the renal pelvis is in the renal sinus, if that makes sense. This whole area of the kidney that's not cortex or medulla is the renal sinus. The renal pelvis is this kind of chamber area of our collecting system. And there's all technical names for it, which we'll get to in a minute. So there's some of these technical terms. So we mentioned the hilum. That's that indentation, that point of entry for all of our major vessels and collecting ducts. There's something called a minor calyx and a major calyx, and then the renal pelvis itself. The renal pelvis is that funnel-shaped area that is collecting the urine from the major and minor calyces. So if I flip back here, you can see some of these structures, and they're not labeled on this diagram because I don't know why, but you can label them if you like, if you have this printed out. So you have these little collecting systems here off of the tip of each papillae or each pyramid pointing inwards. Those are called the minor calyx. So there's little minor calyces here. The minor calyces are draining into the major calyces or the major calyx. So you have a major calyx here, a major calyx here, and a major calyx here, all leading to the renal pelvis. So going back to Latin terminology, the word calyx means, anyone know? Cup, means cup. So there are these little cups at the tips of the pyramids collecting the urine, which is called filtrate technically, collecting the filtrate, and these minor calyces, small cups, lead to the big cups, major calyces, which leads to the renal pelvis. Don't you wish you've taken Latin before this class? It really would have helped. There is an actual kidney. It's obviously not all as neat and dandy as in our nice little colorful model, but most of you are going into the medical field. Nothing's going to be nice and pretty and color-coded for you in the medical field, so you have to kind of get used to dealing with it. So the microscopic anatomy of our kidneys. This is where it gets really super cool. So the functional unit of a kidney is called a nephron. There are two types of nephrons. So if we zoom into this cortex and we zoom into this medulla, we will see these nephrons spread throughout. The cortical nephrons are the nephrons which are in the cortex, right? And this is the majority of the nephrons in our kidneys. These are cortical nephrons. They're mostly in the cortex. These are responsible mostly for regulating, right, filtering, etc., getting out the sodium, getting out the potassium, whatever, adjusting your blood volume concentrations. Juxtamedullary nephrons are in the medulla. Juxta means kind of next to, medullary. These are like next to or within the medulla. So these nephrons are deeper in the kidney section. Smaller number, only 15%, and they have what we call a very, very long nephron loop compared to our cortical nephrons. These are responsible for concentrating our urine. So these are the ones that are really active in times of dehydration and times where you really need to hyperconcentrate your urine, juxtamedullary nephrons. There they are in a nice little color-coded scene for you. We're going to learn all of these parts. So you have your cortical nephron, which again is in that outer cortex. Some of it may go into the medulla a little bit. And then our juxtamedullary nephron extending deep into the medulla. Notice this long blue tube here, which is called a collecting duct. We'll learn that terminology in a minute. That collecting duct has all of these little shoots coming off of it. That's because there are several nephrons. This whole little loopy swoopy thing is called a nephron. There are several of these for each collecting duct. So these collecting ducts dump out into our minor calyx. So notice this is the tip of the pyramid, right? This is one of the renal papilla. There would be lots of these dumping out into this small minor calyx right here. So, and then lots of nephrons associated with each of those collecting ducts. You can pause the video. You know what? Maybe I'll pause the video here because we're about to get into some tricky stuff. Sorry, my hair is always a little messy. Anyways, have an awesome day, and we're going to start talking about specific nephron structure in the next lecture. Bye.